An Introduction to the Sound and the Fury. Mississippi Quarterly, 26, Summer 1973. Art is no part of Southern life. In the North, it seems to be different. It is the hardest minor stone in Manhattan's foundation. It is a part of the glitter and shabbiness of the streets. The arrowing buildings rise out of it, and because of it, to be torn down and arrow again. There will be people leading small bourgeois lives, those countless and almost invisible bones of its articulation, lacking any one of which the whole skeleton might collapse, whose bread will derive from it. Polyglot boys and girls, progressing from tenement schools to editorial rooms and art galleries. Men with gray hair and paunches who run linotype machines and take up tickets at concerts, and then go sedately home to Brooklyn and suburban stations where children and grandchildren await them long after the descendants of Irish politicians and Neapolitan racketeers are as forgotten as the wild Indians and the pigeon, and of Chicago, too. Of that rhythm not always with harmony or tune lusty, loud-voiced, always changing and always young, drawing from a river basin which is almost a continent, young men and women into its living unrest, and then spewing them forth again to write Chicago in New England and Virginia and Europe. But in the South, art, to become visible at all, must become a ceremony, a spectacle, a gypsy encampment and a church bazaar given by a handful of alien murmurers who must waste themselves in protest and active self-defense until there is nothing left with which to speak. A single week, say a furious endeavor for a show to be held on Friday night, and then struck and vanished, leaving only a paint-stiffened smock or a worn-out typewriter ribbon in the corner, and perhaps a small bill for cheesecloth or bunting in the hands of an astonished and bewildered tradesman. Perhaps this is because the South, I speak in the sense of the indigenous dream of any given collection of men having something in common, be it only geography and climate, which shape their economic and spiritual aspirations into cities, into a pattern of houses or behavior, is old since dead. New York, whatever it may believe of itself, is young since alive. It is still a logical and unbroken progression from the Dutch, and Chicago even boasts of being young. But the South, as Chicago is the Midwest, and New York the East, is dead, killed by the Civil War. There is a thing known whimsically as the New South, to be sure, but it is not the South. It is a land of immigrants who are rebuilding the towns and cities into replicas of towns and cities in Kansas and Iowa and Illinois, with skyscrapers and striped canvas awnings instead of wooden balconies, and teaching the young men who sell the gasoline and the waitresses in the restaurants to say, "Oh, yeah?" and to speak with hard R's, not hanging over the intersections of quiet and shaded streets, where no one save northern tourists in Cadillacs and Lincolns ever pass at a gait faster than a horse trots, changing red and green lights and savage and peremptory bells. Yet this art, which has no place in Southern life, is almost the sum total of the Southern artist. It is his breath, blood, flesh, all. Not so much that it is forced back upon him, or that he is forced bodily into it by the circumstance, forced to choose lady and tiger fashion between being an artist and being a man. He does it deliberately. He wishes it so. This has always been true of him and of him alone. Only Southerners have taken horsewhips and pistols to editors about the treatment or maltreatment of their manuscript. This, the actual pistol, was in the old days, of course. We no longer succumb to the impulse. But it is still there, still within us, because it is himself that the Southerner is writing about, not about his environment, who has, figuratively speaking, taken the artist in him on one hand and his milieu in the other, and thrust the one into the other like a clawing and spitting cat into a crocker sack. And he writes, "We have never got, and probably will never get, anywhere with music on the plastic forms. We need to talk, to tell, since oratory is our heritage. We seem to try in the simple, furious breathing, or writing span of the individual to draw a savage indictment of the contemporary scene, or to escape from it into a make-believe region of swords and magnolias and mockingbirds, which perhaps never existed anywhere. Both of the courses are rooted in sentiment. Perhaps the ones who write savagely and bitterly of the incest in clay-floored cabins are the most sentimental, a matter of violent partisanship in which the writer unconsciously writes, into every line and phrase, his violent despairs and rages and frustrations, or his violent prophecies of still more violent hopes. That cold intellect, which can write with calm and complete detachment and gusto of its contemporary sense, is not among us. I do not believe there lives the Southern writer who can say without lying that writing is any fun to him. I seem to have tried both of the courses. I have tried to escape, and I have tried to indict. After 5 years, I look back at the sound and the fury, and see that that was the fuming point. In this book, I did both at one time. When I began the book, I had no plan at all. I wasn't even writing a book. Previous to it, I had written 3 novels with progressively decreasing ease and pleasure, and reward or emolument. The third one was shopped about for 3 years, during which I sent it from publisher to publisher, with a kind of stubborn and fading hope of at least justifying the paper I had used, and the time I had spent writing it. This hope must have died at last, because one day it suddenly seemed as if a door had clapped silently and forever to between me and all publishers' addresses and book lists, and I said to myself, I can now write. Now I can just write. Whereupon I, who had 3 brothers and no sisters, and was destined to lose my first daughter in infancy, began to write about a little girl. I did not realize then that I was trying to manufacture the sister which I did not have, and the daughter which I was to lose, though the former might have been apparent from the fact that Katty had 3 brothers almost before I wrote her name on paper. I just began to write about a brother and a sister, splashing one another in the book. And the sister fell and wet her clothing, and the smallest brother cried, thinking that the sister was conquered or perhaps hurt. Or perhaps he knew that he was the baby, and that she would quit whatever water battles to comfort him. When she did so, when she quit the water fight and stooped in her wet garments above him, the entire story which is told by that same little brother in the first section seemed to explode on the paper before me. I saw that peaceful glinting of that branch was to become the dark, harsh flowing of time, sweeping her to where she could not return to comfort him, but that just separation, division, would not be enough, not far enough. It must sweep her into dishonor and shame too, and that Benji must never grow beyond this moment, that for him all knowing must begin and end with that fierce, panting, paused, and stooping wet figure which smelled like trees, that he must never grow up to where the grief of bereavement could be leavened with understanding, and hence the alleviation of rage, as in the case of Jason, and of oblivion, as in the case of Quentin. I saw that they had been sent to the pasture to spend the afternoon, to get away from the house during the grandmother's funeral, in order that the brothers and nigger children could look up at the muddy seat of Katty's drawers as she climbed the tree to look in the window at the funeral, without then realizing the symbology of the soiled drawers. For here again hers was the courage which was to face later with honor the shame which she was to engender, which Quentin and Jason could not face, the one taking refuge in suicide, the other in vindictive rage, which drove him to rob his bastard niece of the meager sums which Katty could send her. For I had already gone on to night and the bedroom in Dilsey, with the mud-stained drawers scrubbing the naked backside of that doomed little girl, trying to cleanse with the sorry byblow of its soiling that body, flesh, whose shame they symbolized and prophesied, as though she already saw the dark future and the part she was to play in trying to hold that crumbling household together. Then the story was complete, finished. There was Dilsey to be the future, to stand above the fallen ruins of the family like a ruined chimney, gaunt, patient, and indomitable, and Benji to be the past. He had to be an idiot so that, like Dilsey, he could be impervious to the future, the one like her by refusing to accept it at all, without thought or comprehension, shapeless, neuter, like something eyeless and voiceless, which might have lived, existed, merely because of its ability to suffer, in the beginning of life, half-fluid, groping, a pallid and helpless mass of all mindless agony under sun, in time yet not of it, save that he could nightly carry with him that fierce, courageous being who was to him but a touch and a sound that may be heard on any golf links, and a smell like trees, into the slow, bright shapes of sleep. Story's all there in the first section as Benji told it. I did not try deliberately to make it obscure when I realized that the story might be printed. I took 3 more sections, all longer than Benji's, to try to clarify it. But when I wrote Benji's section, I was not writing it to be printed. If I were to do it over now, I would do it differently, because the writing of it, as it now stands, taught me both how to write and how to read. And even more, it taught me what I had already read, because on completing it I discovered, in a series of repercussions like summer thunder, the Flauberts and Conrads and Turgeniers, which as much as 10 years before I had consumed whole, and without assimilating at all, as a moth or a goat might. I have read nothing since. I have not had to. And I've learned but one thing since about writing. That is, that the emotion definite and physical, and yet nebulous, to describe which the writing of Benji's section of The Sound and the Fury gave me, that ecstasy, that eager and joyous faith and anticipation of surprise, which the yet unmarred sheets beneath my hand held, inviolate and unfailing, will not return. The unreluctance to begin the cold satisfaction in work well and arduously done is there, and will continue to be there as long as I can do it well. But that other will not return. I shall never know it again. So I wrote Quentin's and Jason's sections, trying to clarify Benji's, but I saw that I was merely temporizing. that I should have to get completely out of the book. I realized that there would be compensations, that in a sense I could then give a final turn to the screw and extract some ultimate distillation. Yet it took me better than a month to take pen and write. The day dawned bleak and chill before I did so. There is a story somewhere about an old Roman who kept at his bedside a Tyrrhenian vase which he loved, and the rim of which he wore slowly away with kissing it. I had made myself a vase, but I suppose I knew all the time that I could not live forever inside of it, that perhaps to have it so that I could lie in bed and look at it would be better. Surely, so when that day should come, when not only the ecstasy of writing would be gone, but the unreluctance and the something worth saying too. It's fine to think that you will leave something behind you when you die, but it's better to have made something you can die with. Much better the muddy bottom of a little doomed girl climbing a blooming pear tree in April to look in the window at the funeral. Oxford, 19 August 1933.